Welcome to our discussions. I'm going to take you on a journey, I hope, over the course of time. But before I do, I think it's a little important to share with you who I am and maybe why I have something to share. My name is David Bland. For the last 24 years, I've been running my own company. But the truth of the matter is, I've been engaged in things of that nature a lot longer than that. So let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm a degreed nuclear engineer. I have a master's in business. I've spent my post-college years, professional years, if you will, primarily serving the nuclear industry or utility industries in general. During that period of time, I also had to do a couple of other things. The first is I chose to actually operate a very large nuclear power plant here in the U.S., which required me to get licensed by federal agencies that oversee those facilities and become what's called a senior reactor operator. In addition to that, because I like to be challenged, I also took a stint and worked as a securities broker in the investment industry and obtained a license to be a securities broker. So I understand the securities markets and have been in them as well. Finally, I would add that, honestly, quite to my surprise, shortly after opening my own company, I received a letter from Entrepreneur magazine, if you're familiar with it. I thought they were trying to sell me magazines, and so for a while I didn't really pay attention to it, but I eventually opened it. I'm not really sure why. What it boiled down to, and the short version of the story, is in 2002, Entrepreneur magazine listed my firm as the 82nd fastest growing startup in the nation, which was to me astonishing. I really didn't expect or realize that was true. So a little bit about my history. My family was in businesses as I grew up. My grandparents and my great uncle ran motels. I grew up in Florida. They ran and owned motels on the beachside in Daytona Beach. My father owned a convenience store on the mainland section of Daytona Beach and ran that. And at the age of 8, I started working in that store. Now, don't tell anybody because, right, you're not supposed to do that. But we did because it's a family business. And I worked with my grandparents in their motels as well. By the time I was 12, I was actually pulling, if I remember right, it was 3 evening shifts. So, you know, from about 4 in the afternoon after I got out of school until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, something like that. By the time I turned 15, my dad had a unfortunate health event and really was never again able to run his business. So at 15, I basically took it over, and I had to go to work after every morning of high school and work until 11 o'clock, 5 days a week. So I pulled the evening shifts. Actually got held up in an armed robbery during that period of time as well. So I've had a colorful life, but I've also had an educational life, right? So in the early years, and of course, as I went to college, I had to work as well to make it through there and pay bills. So I've worked with companies like Sears and hospitality businesses and warehouses, and quite a bit of meat cutter, quite a diverse youth, if you will, in terms of experiences. But after college, I have primarily worked in either management or technical fields, as you might imagine, given my education. I have worked at multiple nuclear power plants across the country, helping them start up, helping them operate, helping build them, helping design them. About 25 years ago, I made the decision that I thought there was a business opportunity for me in that industry, which frankly was surprising to me, and I decided I wanted to embark upon it. And so I formed my own firm, and I opened up the doors. As I mentioned, Entrepreneur magazine gave me an honor in 2002 for the success we were having. And I was able to essentially form a new business where no product of the kind had ever been sold. Now, let me assure you, if you're thinking about embarking upon this, it is not for the faint of heart. Okay, it is tough, it is brutal, even when you're successful, and you have to learn an awful lot of things. So for 24 years, I've run Travis, which is my company, and several subsidiaries that over time we formed. At the peak, I was running 5 different companies, all owned by the parent company. I have acquired additional firms that others formed over time. So I've been engaged in company acquisitions and all the determinations and financing and things that goes with that. So that will tell you a little bit about my history. Let me tell you why I'm doing this. It's pretty simple. As you might be able to tell from some of the things I said, I was greatly influenced by my dad and my grandfather. And, you know, I suspect you as well have stories that you remember from people over time that have influenced your life. And it's odd, the things that stick with us, that they say to us. And it's equally odd, the things they think to share. And I can tell you, doing it now myself, it's hard to know what to share. All right? But long ago, when I was still a teenager, my grandfather shared a story with me. Now, he had 2 daughters that he raised, and at the time, he wasn't in Florida. He did eventually move to Florida, but he was in the upstate section of South Carolina. And he shared with me an experience that he had. It was a small little town he lived in. He ran a little clothing store in there that he had opened up, and it was an independent unit. This is right in the 40s and 50s. He, of course, because it was a small town and he was a businessman, right, he was known in the community and participated in those type of things. And years later, I ended up, for reasons that are not important, buying a house in that little community. And I ended up buying a house from someone he actually knew back when he had lived there in the 40s and 50s. And so he told me a story about the lady that had passed away, and I had bought the house from her estate. And this is the story. He knew the family. They were just down the street from where he grew up and raised his family. But as is the case in many circumstances, an unfortunate event occurred, and the husband passed away at a fairly young age with a family. And when that occurred, again, small town, if you live in a small town, you know how this works. If you don't, it's a very close-knit community, no matter who you are. And he was talking to the widow, and she said something to him that clearly was memorable. He shared it with me, which obviously is memorable. And I'm going to share it with you because it is a big piece of what motivates me to be sharing this way, because that's not necessarily my norm. And what he said to me was what the widow said. And what she shared with him was life-changing for her at the time, but for me as well. And it's this. She told him to be sure his daughters knew to never marry a man who carries the business in his head. Because if anything happens to him, and her husband, by the way, was a lawyer, if anything happens to him, you're left with nothing, because the entire value of what he was and the business he ran is gone. You can't get facts out of a brain that no longer has a beating heart. And I've thought about that over the years, because in many respects, much of my business has been because I carry stuff in my head through a lifetime of experience. So I worry about that. Now, I don't worry about it as much now as at my age as you could probably infer. But I still worry about it. As we've run the company, just like my parents and grandparents did, I've allowed my daughters, which I have, to participate and frankly experience what it means to operate your own business. And so they've watched through their growing years, which is when I was running the larger company, what it means to be in that chair and to have those responsibilities and to run those type of events and all the issues you face. They are all grown now. They are in their late 30s or late 20s into mid 30s. And they have a fairly uniform opinion. And it's this: they would never want to do a business that they're running on their own, having watched me do mine. Now, I don't want to discourage you, and we'll talk more about this over time. Okay, but I also recognize things happen in your life that change your opinion. So they're not ready. They weren't interested in taking over my business. They weren't interested in starting their own. And so, as you might imagine, although they are diversely educated and talented, now's not the time that they would have a particular interest in learning all the features and functions and challenges that you face as a business owner. So I can't transfer that knowledge to them. In spite I intend on living forever, I'm also confident I will not. So how does one cope with that? How do you transfer what you've learned to those you want to give it to? So that has been an important factor for me for the last few years. And on top of my own children, I have grandchildren too. And so I can fully anticipate that some way down the line, maybe during my lifetime, but maybe after my lifetime, one of those people I care about is going to want to start their own business. And I want to be able to counsel them when they do, at the times they're encountering the things they will encounter, that I know they will because I have. And so that's a big piece of why I'm doing this. But there's another piece as well. As you can probably anticipate, I had bought a building to run my larger company in. As I started winding it down for a whole lot of complex reasons, and I'm sure over the course of all of these presentations you will hear some of that, I no longer needed all the space. And so I eventually moved towards thinking, well, maybe I should lease space in this building, which, by the way, is the building I'm sitting in today. And because I'm an entrepreneur, and because it's exceptionally hard for entrepreneurs, I got an idea, and I had a particular section of my building that I thought was ideally suited to new startup businesses that people were trying to start, but were being overwhelmed with the obligations of doing that in a professional way. And so I segmented a section of the building explicitly for entrepreneurs. We charged very little rent for those spaces. We didn't require any lengthy leases so that people could come in and take a run at trying to live their dream. It was a fascinating thing to watch. I still, to this day, I've been doing it now for 4 years. In fact, I've converted a great portion of the building to that. And I love watching people do it. Now, make no mistake, we've had no shortage of people who came in here with their dream, and within a year, it was over. The sad truth is that's the norm. But what isn't sad, and including the people who've experienced it, is if you've never tried and you have the hunger, you will never know if you can make it go. And so even the failures have been rewarding to watch people try. But during that course, as we got more and more really brand new folks who never really, other than having jobs, have tried to be entrepreneurs, I found some interesting experiences. And those experiences were, and I offered it to people who came. It's like, if you're in the building, look, you're going to run into things that are stunning. If you are not already in business, okay, you're just thinking about it, or even if you are in business, one thing you're absolutely going to learn, particularly as a new startup, you have to know how to do everything. There's nobody to fall back on. It's just you. Now, you can hire people. There's expertise in every single solitary discipline that would be necessary to help you run your company. You can hire people as staff members who have expertise too. And I've done all those things. But if all you do is delegate, I'm just going to tell you now, you might as well stop, okay? Because the fact of the matter is there'll be no money left for you. Okay? So in truth, it's your company. They're your decisions. And there'll be questions that you don't have the foggiest idea of how to answer. But you have to answer them anyway, because there's nobody like when you're an employee to turn to and say, well, we'll turn that over to HR department, or we'll will turn it over to accounting, or I'll turn it over to senior management, or whatever it is you are used to doing. Those options are no longer available to you. People are bringing those problems to you and expecting you to make a decision. And frankly, you won't have a choice. You will have to. So it's very lonely chair to sit in. And it's a very hard chair to sit in. And what I have told people is, I've had death threats, I've had lawsuits, I've had growth, as the Entrepreneur magazine would suggest to you. And I've had personnel challenges that would shock you. Shocked me, and I've been in business for a long time running and managing people. And didn't change the fact that I've never ceased to be surprised. And you're going to have to answer how to do all those things. So I told a lot of those entrepreneurs, and I regularly tell them when they come into our building, look, I don't know your business. Okay? I know the businesses that I've run. I know the businesses that I've been involved in, like the retail trade and hospitality to some extent. But I don't know every business. But the truth is that every business, no matter what it is you're doing, are going to experience similar challenges. And those things I've encountered. And so I told all those folks over the years that, look, if you find something you don't know what to do with, I will be more than happy to suggest to you similar experiences, the options I found, the options I chose, and how it turned out. And you can benefit from that. It's the reason why I'm doing this. It became, as you might imagine, a fairly popular thing. I can tell you over the last 4 years, it's been astonishing to me how many of those people, and others that I've encountered, have come to me and said, you should be doing this. Okay, there's nowhere we've been able to find to get what you can tell us and the experiences that you've had and your willingness to share it. And in fact, one of those people told me, who was a reverend, that that's probably something I ought to consider at this stage in my life as my calling, something that I really owe people. So between my desire to help my family in the future, my experience in advising new entrepreneurs and how that's turned out, and the counsel from a shocking multitude of people that I have encountered, that I should be doing this. All of that has led me to do this, so that in the future, two things can happen. First, and frankly most important to me, that my children and grandchildren, if they ever decide they want to do a business, whether I'm alive or not, through this medium, I can speak to them. I can help them long after I'm gone, and I can advise them. But also important to me, more so, and as honestly, as time has gone by, I would like to help you understand what you're facing, understand how to cope with some of those fairly routine but unpleasant things, and some of them pleasant, and give you a primer on how to do in your own experience the things that I had to learn on my own. So we will follow this with more instruction, lessons. I will do everything I can to think about what I needed to know, what I had to learn, and what I learned, and what might be helpful to you in figuring out how to live your own dream. Because it's lonely sitting in this chair that I'm sitting in. And if you're thinking about doing your own business, your chair will be the same. And I will tell you one thing in closing for this session. In spite of the fact that Entrepreneur magazine, about a year and a half into my company's operation, contacted me and ultimately, maybe 6 months later, published the we were having an unusual degree of success. The candid truth was, I felt like I was completely out of control and most likely doing the wrong things. Now, the good news is, at least for me, I had another friend who was a nuclear engineer who left the industry years before I decided to run my own business. And I was still in touch with him, and he'd had a degree of success too. And so I called him one day, and I told him, his name was Dan. I told him, I said, look, I need some help. I need some advice. I feel like we are in real trouble, and I'm not sure I'm doing the right things. And so we talked. And the punchline of that story is this. He told me what I just told you. He said, let me just tell you this. He said, I've heard everything you have to say. I heard everything you're doing. And remember, this is an individual who is also a nuclear engineer. So he understood the technical aspects of what I was coping with too, the business itself. And his response to me was, you're doing nothing wrong. Sounds to me like what you're doing is just right. And I asked him, how can that be when I feel so lost and so uncomfortable? And that's what he shared to me. He says, let me assure you, that's how we all feel. Every single day. We don't know if we're doing the right things. We are the final word. It is a very lonely chair that you're sitting in. And while knowledge and talent and drive, and all of those things are, and frankly, a little bit of luck, are all important for the mission that you must be either in or thinking about taking. Maybe the biggest thing that keeps you on track is the fear of failure, the fear that you are not doing the right things, and your constant willingness to adapt, to struggle, to innovate, to fight, and survive. So with that, I'm going to call a close to this introduction to who I am, why I'm here talking to you, and what brought me here, and what is my motivation for doing this. There'll be additional modules we'll create that'll run through the processes, the decisions, some considerations, but that will hopefully help you on your dream and the path to that success. We'll talk soon.